We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. It's been a week after the November election. Now, later in the show, we'll check in with a Marquette fellow who helps answer the question, where did Republicans outperform Democrats in Wisconsin? We also sit down with a newly elected state senator who helped flip a longtime Republican district for the Democrats. But we start with the budget season. State agencies are putting together their budget requests, and this week the Department of Public Instruction made waves. State Superintendent Jill Underly is asking for an additional $3 billion for state schools, citing Wisconsin's $4 billion budget surplus as a reason to back that request. This also comes as Underly is up for re-election this coming April. Now, she spoke with us about that budget request and whether it could pass the Republican-controlled state legislature. When you're putting together this major agency budget, what do you kind of factor? What are the things that you consider?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that we need to reinvest in our public schools and in the future of our kids. Putting this together, I mean, Wisconsin public schools have been asked to do more with less for far too many years. And when you think about, at least in the past 10, 15, 20 years, even the cost of educating students has risen steadily, not just because of inflation, but because of a lot of things. I mean, you think about the amount of technology that we have in our buildings and in our classrooms, and there's lots of rising costs, and state funding has not kept up with these increases.
So one of the major things to highlight in your budget is this return to, or this increase to 90% reimbursement for special education. Why is that so critical in this budget?
It is very critical. It's actual spendable revenue for our school districts. The cost of reimbursing special education from the state has been at 30%. Or roughly like 32% in that area, depending on the district. And because it is a program that school districts have to pay the full amount for and cannot run deficits in, they have been funding it through their general education programming fund, which we call Fund 10. So if we were to reimburse it at a higher rate, that is money that actually stays in our schools, stays in our classrooms, and provides services to all kids.
When we talk about those school deficits, we've seen districts like Madison, for example, in Dane County here, go to referendum this fall. How would this budget impact those asks that these local districts are making of taxpayers?
Yeah, so if we were to get the funding, we would definitely see fewer referendum. The reason our school districts have to go to referendum is because the state has not met their obligation. They used to fund 2/3 of educational costs in our schools, and that stopped a long time ago. And so as a result, you've seen more and more school districts having to go to referendum just to pay for general operating costs, which are plentiful. I mean, you think about just facility repairs, that's part of it, but utilities, transportation costs go up. And of course, we are a human resources heavy profession and service in education. And so teachers and support staff and custodials and food service, all of that is wrapped into those things. And if you're not getting inflationary increases at the very least, or the state is not funding it at the 2/3 that they used to, our school districts have no choice if they want to keep their doors open and provide community education services in their villages. So they have to go to referendum. This year, we had over 50%, or I think it was just right around 50% of school districts go to referendum. And that's not going to slow down. So this budget would, prevent that. It would. I'm not saying school districts wouldn't have to go in the future, but it would certainly slow down the amount.
Now, on the horizon, are we close to that 2/3 mark at all?
No, we are not. And it goes down, it seems, every so often because inflation has gone up, and the increases that we get from the state have not even kept up with inflation. 15 years ago, school districts lost, I think it was around $600 per student. And we have not caught up with that yet. So we're having to backfill that with local referendum.
Now, it's a roughly $3 billion ask that you're making on DPI's behalf. The state has a $4 billion budget surplus. Now, that would take a significant chunk out of that $4 billion. How feasible do you think this is to pass?
I think it has to be feasible. I mean, I'm hopeful it passes. I mean, our communities are signaling that they support public education. What this would do is if we could use the surplus for this, we're able then to keep property taxes down. We wouldn't see more than a 1.5 increase in property tax over the biennium. And so I think, it's a win-win for taxpayers. This is a form of tax relief. When you think about it, it is our tax dollars that went into the surplus. We paid with good faith that it would be used for the services that are important to us. And I think our taxpayers have signaled, at least, in this most recent referendum, where nearly 80% of them passed, is that public education is very important to them.
How does this compare to your past, I guess, the first budget that you offered up?
Yeah, I mean, it's more, clearly. I mean, my first budget that I requested, for example, the same amount for mental health, but that got stripped out in the budget negotiation process by the legislature. I've asked for previously, I think it was 60% for special education reimbursement, and we still didn't get that. So public education is just one of many, many items, of course, that the legislature has to look at when putting together their budget. But historically, public education has not been a priority, as when you look at what actually makes it out of the budget process.
And so when you face joint finance coming up this next spring here, what's your elevator pitch to Republicans to get them on board with this proposal?
Well, first to know is that public education is supported by every person in the state. When you look at the value that it provides to our community, when you look at the future that it provides to the citizens of the state, these are the next generation of leaders. These are the next generation of doctors and policymakers and teachers and police officers, and we need to invest in them. My other piece of this is that when we were going through the school system, our state invested in us. I mean, it provided an adequate public education that was funded 2/3 of the costs. And we can't pull up the ladder. We have to make sure that we are doing our part to make sure the next generation is equally prepared and supported.
Dr. Jill Underly, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And after this fall's election, Democrats are now within striking distance of taking back the state Senate. They could do so as early as 2026. When we come back, we sit down with one of the candidates who helped make that possible. Senator-elect Sarah Kieskie joins us right after this. Welcome back. Just a few weeks ago, Democrats in the state Senate were facing a Republican supermajority in that chamber. After this November's election, though, they eroded that majority by picking up 4 seats. And in 2 years, they have a shot at taking back control of the state Senate. Now, one of those candidates who helped set that in motion is Sarah Kieskie of Lodi. Her new district spans parts of Madison, Columbia, Sauk, and Richland counties. We spoke with her in the state Senate parlor. I always want to ask politicians, I think of it like the light switch flipped, where you decided, okay, yes, I want to run. Why did you decide to run for Senate, and why now?
Oh, that's a great question. I was asked to run for Senate, and so I was privileged to have people interested in me as a candidate that had rural roots, that has a background in mental health, and just really enthusiastic about bringing the voice of this small section of Wisconsin forward. And so I moved from running for the Assembly to the Senate with great enthusiasm, but a lot of trepidation too, because it was much bigger. And it was a race that was kind of a 50-50 race. So there was a chance to win, and I had previously been in a race that was unwinnable. And so it was a pretty challenging new direction to be in. But I decided I really wanted to do it because I believe so much in service. I want to be of service. That's why I do what I do as a mental health provider. And so then this was just an opportunity to be of more service to more people. The way that I describe it is I historically have been the person as a mental health provider helping to kind of catch the people as they're falling in stream and they're needing to be pulled out of the waters to keep them from drowning. And now as a policymaker, I can go upstream and I can hopefully help people from falling in.
So I know kind of running between the Assembly and the Senate, a lot has to do with the maps, right?
Yes.
Democrats are in a lot better position than they were 2 years ago, certainly. What are some of those discussions looking like with the caucus? What's the game plan look like this session?
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting, honestly. We were able to flip 4 seats, and so we now went from 10 seats, there was one that was vacant, to 15. And so we're very excited. It's 15 seats now to 18 Republican, and in just 2 years, in 2026, we have the opportunity to flip a few more, and if we do, we'll be in the majority. And so that means that they won't be able to blockade us from having a voice, because historically they've been able to gavel in and gavel out because we were of a super minority. So we had very little say. And now we're going to be able to work together. Hopefully they'll be able to listen to us and hear our voices and hopefully bring some collaboration. That's one of the things I heard so much on the doors when I would talk to people. They really wanted government to be functional. They wanted us to work together. They wanted us to get stuff done. And I am, if nothing else, I'm pragmatic, I'm problem solver, I love to be busy and working, and so that is my goal, is to actually get stuff done and not sit around and argue nonsense. That just is not my way.
So the Capitol is kind of an interesting just office space, right? Some of your colleagues are, up in Tomahawk, for example, way up north. What would you want them to know about your district as they come back to the Capitol here?
Oh, so my district is, well, first of all, it's so beautiful. I mean, if you drive my district, it is so gorgeous, and I just loved every minute of driving and traveling to every corner of it. It was really quite a delight. But my district is both rural, suburban, and urban. Mostly rural though, and so it's a combination of different needs and different wants and different expectations, I think. But what I've centered my campaign on is making sure that obviously I listen to the voters, I listen to my constituents, but I really want to make sure that because much of the district is rural, that rural voice is really heard. I come from a rural background. I grew up on a dairy farm in Cashton, Wisconsin, and I moved my family to a place that was rural because I really wanted them to have that kind of small town and experience. And so it's really important for me to tell everybody about the beauty of small town Wisconsin. And one of the other important parts about my area is we have Lake Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin River, we have the Ice Age Trail, we have Gibraltar Rock, we have some really beautiful natural resources too that I hope people come and explore and enjoy because it's just a gorgeous area.
You're talking a little bit earlier about the mental health advocacy. Anything specific to your experience that you want to take to the Capitol here?
One of the things that I've talked a lot about, so I've been a therapist for 25 years, and while I think it's very important to get more providers available, let's say in schools, I really think that we need to make sure that we have mental health providers that are available in schools. And that will be one of the priorities that I have, making sure there's more access. But I also think we need to think about the social determinants of mental health. So we need to go into the idea of people are struggling now because of issues and reasons. We need to look at food scarcity. We need to look at housing issues. We need to look at any trauma-induced situations that are happening. For example, being in schools where from the very age of 4, you're learning about gun violence and having to hide under your chair or in the corner and learn how to fight. Those are not healthy for our children at a very deep level. We're teaching them that their environment is unsafe. And so we need to think about what are we doing that's contributing to more anxiety, more depression in our world, and I want to address those issues. So while mental health will be a big focus for me, I'm going to be looking broader, bigger, early issues.
Are there any specific committees that you'd want to be seating on?
Yes, there is one that has mental health and substance abuse. I want to definitely be on that one. There's one that's for agriculture, and I really want to be on that one. Growing up on a small rural farm, I know what small farm life is like, and I want to make sure that we make that viable for people that are wanting to maintain that tradition. The schools is the other one that I really want to be involved in education. And then there's a couple more that have sort of some odd mixes in there, but those are probably the 3 that I would most want.
So we heard from Democrats and to some extent Republicans too, talking about this idea of bipartisanship. You know, it's easy to kind of see everything so polarized. When we see this new session coming, and especially you now just seated in January, what does that bipartisanship mean to you?
That's a great question. Okay, so one of the things when I got into running, I originally was running because I just wanted to have a name on the ballot. I wanted to make sure I could help uptick it because there wasn't a chance to win. Once I became a candidate for the Senate, things changed and I had to look at, well, how do I have skills that are going to really apply if I am able to become a senator? And one of the things I realized is as a mental health provider, somebody that sees families and couples, and I also see individuals, couples work is very interesting because as a therapist, you can't pick a side. You cannot have the wife win every session, right? Or the husband win every session. You have to be willing to say, okay, my goal is to improve the family, the coupleship, right? And so that's how I think of my job now, is I can't just be firmly in the Democratic stance or in the Republican stance. I want to be thinking about Wisconsin. And if Wisconsin then is my client, if you will, in my mind, then it means that it's going to have to be bipartisan because I need to make sure that there is a win-win for both sides because I don't really want anybody to lose, right? But that means that people are going to have to compromise. It will not be a zero-sum game in my mind. It will have to have where we work together, we find good solutions, and that there will have to be some give and take, but for the most part, we want most people to win most ways possible.
When we come back, Marquette University fellow John Johnson breaks down where Republicans made gains in Wisconsin, paving the way for both a Trump victory, but also for Baldwin to keep her seat. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. The unofficial results are in for Wisconsin after the November 5th election. Now, Republicans won the presidential race, making gains in 68 out of 72 Wisconsin counties. That's from data compiled by our next guest, John Johnson of Marquette University. Thanks so much for sitting down with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So I kind of want to get a sense of what we've seen in the presidential races between 2020 and 2024. At least in Wisconsin, the top line result changed. Democrats winning in 2020, Republicans winning in 2024. What did we see last Tuesday?
It's such a, elections for the president are a binary outcome because of the Electoral College in a state. And so in this case, it feels like a huge change. On the vote margin, it wasn't that big of a change, from a 21,000 vote victory for the Democrat in 2020 to a 29,000 vote victory for the Republican in 2024. This in a state where 3 1/3 or more million votes are cast in a presidential election. And so what we saw on Tuesday was a small shift towards Trump almost everywhere. 68 of the 72 counties shifted towards Trump. The only exceptions were the 3 WOW counties plus Door County. So Dane County, Milwaukee County, then every rural and small city. Those counties all shifted towards Trump. But it wasn't particularly large of a shift in very many places, and it wasn't enough to pull Eric Hovde across the finish line with him. And we saw sort of the same split result in the state legislature, where Republicans did about as well as they could hope to, limiting Democratic gains to 45 seats in the state assembly. On the other hand, Democrats won all 4 of the seats they were targeting in the state Senate, which puts them in a great position for 2026.
So we were chatting a little bit off air that you compiled this ward level data, and I want to give you all the props for doing so, how labor intensive that was. If we look at it, it's kind of a checkerboard pattern, right? We see these small little townships across the state pop kind of bright red, showing that they shifted more for Trump from 2020 to 2024. You also did a look at some of the demographics of each individual ward. Did we see any trends across the state of, what about a city like Madison or a small ward in Marathon County made them vote a certain way?
Yes, we did. So the youngest places shifted by about 3 points towards Trump, whereas the middle-aged and older places only shifted by 1 point. And in Madison, that shows up in the wards near UW-Madison. We see the same thing near Marquette University in Milwaukee, UW-La Crosse, UW-Whitewater. Most of the universities in the state saw a shift towards Trump in the wards closest to them relative to 2020. Then we also see a shift towards Trump in the quintile of wards that have the lowest levels of college attainment. And so that's another explanation of the pattern. The simplest way to explain why Harris lost and Biden won is that Trump continued to make gains in the least educated wards in the state, whereas Harris really only treaded water relative to Biden in the most educated wards. So in past elections, we've seen this divergence where the most educated, we've seen this divergence where the most educated wards shifted towards the Democrats and the least towards Trump. That trend continued to benefit Trump this time, but Harris only matched Biden's performance in the most educated places.
We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. Well, 'tis the season. Governor Evers announced this week the theme for the Capitol tree this year. Now, the tree will celebrate the Wisconsin State Park System, which turns 125 next year. Now, Google tells me that is the quincentennial anniversary. The tree will be decorated by handmade ornaments from students across the state. You can send your own ornaments to the Department of Administration by November 22nd to be included. That does it for us this week. I'm Will Keneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.